Okay, so we were talking about cultural norms, and I sent you a link to the original kind of ask guest culture um, thing, Kasra, which you read, and then you asked me some questions that we thought we would just talk about on a video and post it, rather than having a Twitter chat convo. So yeah, do you want to share your questions and we can dive in?
Is it possible is it possible to transcend social norms? What would that even look like?
Yeah. So my thought on that is that once you start talking about something like that, you're getting into something that I would call meta norms, which is like how do people relate to the concept of a norm in the first place? Um, and it's like, you know, without knowing what the norms of a group are, like what can you say about like how would you go about finding out what the norms of a group are? In fact, it's an interesting question. Like one answer is you could watch people. Another answer is you could try stuff and find out how people respond. Do they like encourage you or do they like go, whoa, dude, we can't do that? Um, and what kinds of things do people do when somebody breaks a norm? And like what is people's understanding of what it means for somebody to sort of break a norm um in the first place? Um, yeah. I have this tweet, that old tweet of mine. I think it's one of my kind of underrated uh um underrated tweets. See if I can find it. Oh yeah. So pre-modern norms. That's just the way things are done. Modern norms. This way is correct because postmodern norms. I don't know. We're just trying to figure it out. Um, Metamodern norms. We have common knowledge that if you do X, then Y happens, and we all don't like Y, so we don't do X. And this is sort of in some important sense not actually normative. Like it's not actually like you should do this. It's just like, well, given our understanding, this is how we do things here. But it's sort of it's fluid and it's open to changing. Um, yeah.
How can I set up a space where meta modern norms are the norm?
Right.
Um, and I'm imagining this in the context of school and
Mm,
teenagers, where there is in a certain friend group that I'm in, there's definitely a toxic culture or like a culture that's more insult oriented,
mhm,
and a love through lack of insults rather than love through love. And the
mm.
people that are loving and like doing physical touch um, are do not have that much social influence, which could be a coincidence, but it could be something bigger.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few pieces here. It's something like do well, we could explore this whole thing as a case study, and there'd be quite a lot there, I think. But maybe a koan would be something like, how would people go about recognizing that what was happening was toxic and or put another way, just that there was something better that they could be doing? Like, how would they go about noticing that? And if they tried to do something different that, you're saying might be better, like what would happen if they did? Would people kind of insult them back into doing the old thing? Like why is the system dynamic stable, I guess is kind of a question.
A symptom of youth is not having the patterns to recognize, so lacking a lacking. So I'm lacking thought here. But
Hmm.
then there's also a cutting through general patterns that can happen with youth. Hmm. I wonder to what extent is it the egregores force, and to what extent is it the just this person is toxic and this person is a leader, therefore the rest of the group is toxic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're always dealing with a sort of a bit of both because it's like the way that people respond to that person is partially shaped by their sense of sort of societal norms at large. Um, I think that I think one of the most illustrating things I have to say about this is around like sort of going back to your original question, uh, but I think it'll apply to the other piece as well. Is part of the puzzle here is like if you want to be able to transcend social norms or as I sort of initially responded, if you want to be able to be more aware of and more playful with social norms, um, then um, you need that sort of a move, a move of being playful with social norms to be safe for people. And part of what you can encounter is that people have an expectation that everybody's roughly speaking going to follow the norms, like on some level, and there's a range between that, so there's a range of what it means to be following them. But then it's like if you do something unexpected, like if you go off script, basically, then that puts people in this place of wait, if you went off script like this, how can I how can I rely on you to not go off script in any of 100 or 1,000 other ways? It's like you're now swimming in a bit of an unknown of if it's okay for you to just go off script, then I don't know what to expect of you at all. Is kind of the emotional place that you can get into. And a concrete example of this, um, it's not just about off script, it's also about any kind of change in expectations. So like a concrete example of this would be like if somebody, tells somebody else that they have a crush on them. Like, "Oh, I'd like a different kind of relationship with you." Um, Now, like, it's like, "Oh, this is different. I'm proposing we change our relationship in this way." It might not even be a crush. It might just be like, "Hey, I'd like to be a closer friend with you than we have been. Like, I'd like to, spend deeper time with you." It's like, "Oh, we had our set of expectations and now they're changing, or at least this person wants to change them. Is it is it gonna be safe to navigate the conversation about that? Where I mean kind of like emotionally safe, like, or is somebody's experience gonna get kind of bulldozed by the other? Do you see what I'm pointing at here? I don't feel like I did a super good job of laying it out.
Yeah, it's sort of I'm forgetting my original question. Um right, I have some I have a cloudy sense of it, yeah.
Like about transcending social norms?
The one after that, the sub quest we've gone
Mm,
on.
right. It's
Something
sort of
that's
like how
coming
do you
to
have intentional transformation of culture is like another way to point it.
mhm.
It's like, well,
Yeah,
you kind
yeah.
of need a meta culture in which transformation is like a safe type of move to make because you can kind of fall back on a set of assumptions that are going to feel okay, even if you're kind of swimming in an unknown together.
Meta safe. Something that's coming to mind is a tweet I've had, or there's a phase where this was my bio. Um, it was more aspirational, but it was breaking the social fabric as a treat, and there's a like a bullet point dot. Um, Friendly, wholesome, peer pressure as a service.
Huh. Uh-huh.
And I wonder what your thoughts are on that, or how that relates to your model of
Yeah. Um,
socialness.
I mean, it's like people have comfort zones, right? And if they can have experiences of going a bit outside their comfort zone and discovering that it's fine, then first of all, they might become comfortable with something that they weren't comfortable with before, concretely, right? They have the experience of, asking someone out on a date and they've never done that and then they do and it goes fine. Maybe the person doesn't say yes, but like they don't the interaction goes well or something. Or maybe the person does say yes, and they go, "Whoa, I did an uncomfortable thing," and turns out asking people on dates is like a thing I can do now. But also on a meta level, maybe you learn that doing uncomfortable things is a thing that you are more comfortable with now. So that's like that gets at the meta comfort thing. And so similarly, it's like you might be kind of encouraging people, like helping them get over the edge of some something they're not totally comfortable with, and then they do it anyway, and then they go, oh wow, yeah, I actually can do that.
This relates to the bringing the social fabric. The second part, the peer pressure as a service, uh, relates to a an adventure I've been on, where I was very into the YouTube channel Yes Theory and their motto "Seek Discomfort." So
Hmm.
I would go up to strangers and ask them if they're this person's cousin, or random questions like that, where I expected a no and like
Hmm.
a weirded out response.
Hmm.
Um, and doing stuff like that, or going up to someone and asking them if they remember me. They didn't.
Just
Um,
random people, yeah.
yeah. Uh, it gave me a sort of empathy for the people that want. There's two times where someone has expressed like, oh, I want to message this person, and I'm like, why don't you do it? And they notice some tension or uncomfort or relates to a trauma.
Hmm.
And I I don't I tend to get meta about it and think like, oh, what would your future self in 5 years look back and be like, oh, I'm glad that I've done that. Which direction
Hmm.
would your future self have rather you gone? And I tend to get meta, but it feels like there's a more optimal way of going about it, or this, there's a frustration like, how can I transfer my just do it attitude um into you?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I've struggled with this too. I mean, I used to do a lot of experiments like the kind that you're describing. Like I had this deck of cards called rejection therapy that had all these different prompts on it. Ask to buy something that's not for sale, ask someone to sit down. Just all sorts of things that you would try doing and getting a no. And and so it's like I think, some people are just going to be kind of drawn to that stuff. And and other people less so. Which is not to say they couldn't get something out of it, but like, yeah, it's not gonna. Yeah, there is a kind of meta comfort thing to kind of deal with on the way. Part of the question is like that I would get in touch with is like, what's motivating the person, right? There's like having a just do it attitude in general, but maybe they think if they had that, they would just do a bunch of things that would be bad. Now, sometimes this can be a bit like what a friend of mine called the broccoli error, which is you think, man, I could maybe self modify to like the taste of broccoli, but if I did that, I would eat broccoli and I don't like broccoli. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you liked broccoli, then it wouldn't be a problem that you were eating broccoli. Like you're sort of assessing your new values through the lens of your old values. But there's a real thing there where it's like you do actually want to have some amount of continuity between your old values and your new values. Like you ideally you want your new values to make some amount of sense to your old values, even if they're kind of like, well, yeah, but it's more complicated than that. I mean, it's not that you should never lie. It's that lying causes people to not trust you in this in such a way and causes your word to not be as worthwhile. And there are like edge cases in which lying is kind of necessary. And there's also some cases in which you can't tell the truth because the question is framed in such a way that if you gave the literal truth, it would actually be more misleading than saying sort of a thing that's technically false because of the frame. Like there's no way to actually give a response that would cause the person to update accurately, right? And it's like that, but now that's inconsistent with the previous thing that is like lying is bad, don't do it. Like it's sort of just like, well, it's more complicated than that. Sometimes you can't avoid misleading somebody. Um, Whoops, I left my timer going. Um, anyway, so So yeah, so I mean, all of this is, if we just try to come back to where we started, because we were kind of wandering around a little bit. There's this whole thing um, around like meta norms and transcending norms, and you were just talking about right. Okay, yeah, and so then there's like right. One of the things that people don't realize is that you don't actually get as punished for breaking social norms as most people kind of think that you do. And that's maybe part of what you're sort of pointing at here with this like just do it attitude. And that's one of the things that you learn if you try on one of these like do things and get rejected uh um lifestyle experiments, right? Like you get a bunch of no's and it turns out it's just kind of fine. Like you don't catch on fire when somebody says no. Um and yeah, I mean I think that would be better for I think it would be really good if more people had the chance to learn that. Um But as for how, or wait, as right, so as for how, it's like tapping back into what does the person actually want? Because it's like in this situation, it sounds like this person is like they want to email somebody, and it's like okay, and they're afraid they can't. It's like well, but they want to. Okay, how do you bring that I want to in touch with whatever they're afraid of, and helping them
Mm,
really find out what am I afraid of? And if you use a kind of parts work ish coherence informed approach, you're going to find out that there is some experience they've had or that they've watched somebody else had in the past where somebody got rejected and it was really bad and that they're afraid of that whatever it is and you don't know in advance but yeah getting clear on something like yeah just helping them notice why like what they actually are afraid of how are they thinking about the situation such that it's scary I would say is kind of the way to go with that um yeah
and then once I once we, refine and, find a refined version of, like, what they're afraid of, refined in the concise sense, um, then I don't I find it difficult to comfort them in a way that isn't hyperbolic.
hmm. Well I mean yeah what I would say is like maybe they're right maybe it would be bad. And if you can really make space for that, like really make space for like, okay, part of them thinks it would be bad. How do we actually know? And not try to assume the answer in advance. Now you
Mm,
might have a sense from your experience, it's probably going to be fine. But hey, they're different from you. Maybe it works for you because your avatar is a cute puppy and it wouldn't work for them because their avatar is an angry still from a TV show or something, and if they sent the message, it actually would land differently than it would land if you sent it with your avatar, right? Like there's these subtle things where maybe they actually know something that you don't about what it's like to be them, and maybe they don't, right? Like maybe they don't actually have special relevant information, and maybe the thing would actually be totally fine, but you can't actually know, and so it's like you're inviting their wisdom to be free to send the message or not, and ideally you can come to a place of peace with both, I guess.
mhm.
Yeah, I don't know how much of what I've said is particularly actionable here, but yeah. Um, I would say that as far as transcending social norms go, the meta communication part is pretty key. It's like if you can become comfortable talking about what the norms seem to be and like sort of like why they are the way they are um without being sort of yeah, I guess judgmental or something about that. Like there was a great thread that I was just looking at where people were talking about like why is it rude to point and basically what people sort of concluded or the main author of the thread and I also came to like I also like this was basically like pointing at somebody is kind of like you know saying like calling them it as opposed to like he or she it's like
Mm,
sort of an inanimate objectifying pronoun or something like that and so it's like oh well that's maybe why we have a sort of a norm against pointing at people it's like because it has this effect that we don't like okay but like being able to talk about that rather than just being like it's bad right it's like well it's not inherently bad it's just it has this effect which like most of the time we'd rather not have which starts to get at the meta modern norms thing that I read. So yeah, developing comfort talking about norms. That's probably what I would do in your school group is I would get a little Socrates on them and just be like, "Hey guys, have you noticed that we seem to do this thing? Why do you think we do that?"
I
or something like that. Like trying to invite people to notice that they're doing what they're doing without any sense of like trying to say that it's wrong, just bringing more awareness to what it is that you're doing. Maybe. I mean, the thing to do might also be start over with a new social group rather than trying to like, branch a couple people off and stop trying to, if there's a loud influencing figure in this group who's really mean, like that might just be difficult. Right. I don't know your
There-
scene.
There's an in between of that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. How I think you initially said you want this to be a short conversation. I have something that comes to mind about something you were doing at Vibe Camp. That was really interesting. But I don't want this to be longer than you're comfortable with.
Yeah. Um why don't you ask it, and if it doesn't feel like a
Cool.
thing to go into, then maybe we just chop it off here-ish or whatever.
Sure. I think it was on Saturday, um, at Vibe Camp. You were you and a group of people were like standing in a circle, and mm, it felt different than a jamming sort of music. It felt more rhizomatic, and chaotic.
Rhizomatic, like a rhizome?
Uh, the how I understand rhizomatic is like didn't have a clear beginning or end.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it was very fluid. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, do you remember doing that? Like
Yeah, we were like
how
up
did
on
you
the
think
roof
about
of
that?
the thing, right? Or kind of like up on the second level. Is that where you found us? Or we were kind of walking around, so you may have seen us at a different point.
It was on the
That
there was
doesn't
a
really matter. Anyway, what was salient to you about that? Like, what are you wondering about?
um there was a part of me that's like you're not supposed to be doing that. Um, and then a part of me that was like fascinated by that perspective of and I wanted to ask you about that at the time.
Hmm.
Um, and now it feels relevant.
Yeah. Well, right, because it's related to this whole like transgressing norms thing, or like transcending norms. Yeah, and I mean, part of what was interesting about that is like when the group of us ended up on the sort of, it's not a roof exactly, but the sort of upper level of this structure, kind of up above the tea house. Like we were stomping and we were pretty loud, right? And like,
Yeah, yeah.
the whole tea house was definitely getting an experience of like what is happening up there. And I think I asked the DJ later, and he's like, "Yeah, we were wondering if it was like lightning or like, or something like that." And and so and I was like kind of aware that there was gonna like that the tea house people were gonna hear or whatever. But we were just so clearly into it. And I was like, it might be disrupting them, but it's not gonna be like completely ruining their night, I don't think. And a lot of people even just came up and joined us, right? And so there was some feeling of like, okay, well, we are clearly really into this. Like this is bringing us a lot of joy and meaning. And so we're going to keep doing it and kind of see it through, see it till the end, see where it wants to go. I mean, nobody was really in control was like, I think, part of the other thing, right? Like even if I had been like, oh god, the tea house, oh, I don't want to make too much noise for the tea, like what was I going to do? Right? Like without completely crushing the vibe, right? Like maybe I could have tried to like steer people to go further down the thing, like further away. I maybe could have got them moving. But it would have been tough, right? Like because the thing had a life of its own and it was just kind of going. Um, which is a bit like, it's not exactly an egregore, but it is like a collective consciousness, right? Like it is like a sort of group decision flow thing. Nobody's in charge, but everybody's contributing to what's happening. Um, I'm curious what it was that we were doing that we weren't supposed to, from your perspective. Like, what was the like? Oh, like you can't just what?
Mhm. You can't just make a lot of noise, even though I'm not opposed to it. Other people might be this shadow
Oh, right.
person.
Yeah, the kind of policing on other people's behalf.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a classic way that this sort of that norms get enforced. Yeah, is not even because anybody actually minds, but because they're afraid that somebody else might mind. And this is where if you get a group of people where everybody trusts everybody else to actually speak up for themselves, then you stop having to police things on others' behalfs. And that's like a huge load off. But in most groups, you don't have that because like you just actually can't trust that people are going to speak up for themselves.
I just attended a circling intro,
Oh,
uh,
cool.
and that feels really relevant here. And I like when a group is following the circling ethos, there's a there's a really cozy feeling to it. I'm curious, have you done circling?
A bit, not as much as one might think. I mean, but I'm very aware of it.
How do you think circling can interface with a intellectual conversation? There's a there's a thread about um, this improv movie or TV show or YouTube channel that it was less. They were talking about it being less about information conversion, not information
Transfer?
con transference, yeah, and more about sending movements and seeing where they land.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not. That's not exactly what they said. That was the felt sense I
Yeah.
got from
I
it.
mean, I think ultimately it's worth it, it's a really valuable skill to get the whole circle, like, the basic movements of circling of like becoming present, noticing what's happening in my body, in particular, noticing what's happening in my body in response to what's going on for other people, noticing stories and interpretations I have, and like noticing that they are stories and interpretations rather than like sort of just being caught up inside them. Like all of those are really important moves to have. And, none of them on their own like allows you to make a startup. Like you also need to be able to like think about stuff and like do strategy and like make decisions and stuff. None of which is sort of done within circling. Um and but yeah, I mean ideally you can kind of bridge them. In practice circling seems to be set up in a way that doesn't actually facilitate a lot of that. Like I actually know of a startup that collapsed basically because all the founders got really into circling and they like stopped knowing how to do business strategy. Um and Yeah, but I mean, the thing that I focus on, I have a blog post about this. One of my recent ones. It's called "Co What Now," aiming for flow and sovereignty on the largest scale presently possible. I think. Yeah. Um, and basically, what it's talking about is a mode that like, if you think of circling as being kind of like doing squats or like or something like that, it's like you do squats and you like build up certain muscles, and that's great, but it's not a sport. Like it's, I mean, circling is maybe further towards sport than that, but it's kind of just like training some particular mental motions and like social relational motions. And um so circling is like one type of thing that can be valuable for this, but it is sort of just one component. It isn't a fully complete um operating system for navigating the world. And I was trying to articulate with this co what now thing, what sort of a slightly more general thing that could incorporate the circling skills, but would actually be able to be aimed at stuff. And it basically amounts to you presence with people, you get present to the fact that you are all in a room or in a virtual context. And then you go, okay, what now? And if you can really ask that question and really sit with the unknown, then you end up with something like, well, um, I guess we're talking, maybe. Is there something we need to talk about? Is there information I have that you need or you have that I need? Obviously, that's going to be different for two random strangers who are just meeting versus a team who's working on a project together versus a family who's just like having dinner. But in any case, there's a kind of like, what now? What is present? But what now is not just what's present in my body. It's also like, what's on my mind? What needs to happen tonight? What happened today that you guys need to know about? All of those questions. And you might encounter that one person is actually like, actually, I just need to go do this thing. Like I got a urgent notification that my website's down. I got to go fix that. It's like, okay, great. Like if you actually know already what you need to do, then that is the answer to what now, and go do it. And if you don't, like if you are sort of more like, I don't know, I'm sitting with a lot of questions. It's like, okay, well, let's sit with those questions together. Let's put out the questions and kind of like, sift through them and see if any of the questions that turn out to be answers to the other questions, or see if any of the problems turn out to be solutions to other problems. And you can kind of sit with that together. And that's where it's like noticing the body sensations is still totally relevant, but it's like it's within the context of we are trying to look at what's going on and like be an agent together, not just be a kind of sensing collective organism, but actually an acting collective organism. um yeah, I gotta make a list of all the links to put in the YouTube video. Cool. I think this is a pretty good place to wrap it. We kind of jumped around to a bunch of stuff. Oh, and it, I guess I would say that there's a synergy between, just tying it all back in. There's a synergy between the kind of um co what now thing and the whole meta modern meta norms, or like um uh meta communication thing, because it's like in order to really properly what now, you've got to notice ways in which like, oh, I noticed that when we try to think together, I keep feeling blocked in this way, or I keep feeling like I'm not allowed to do this. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting, let's explore that. Like, can you actually explore it? If you try to do co what now in a context that has really strong, like strongly held norms, then it's sort of, you're not going to be able to really sink into the unknown together, because there's going to be too much of a sense of like, what now? It's like, well, we should watch a movie, right? And like somebody will be trying to sort of like answer the question of what now sort of prematurely, rather than being able to sort of sit with the discomfort of it. So it relates to the comfort zone expansion thing too. Final thoughts?
Um, maybe this would be a good thing to have in the video. So I want to talk about a noticing of, like, when you're saying the blockages as an example. I feel that interrelationally, um, less through text, but through when I'm on video calls with you, I feel blockages, and I'm not sure which way it goes. It's some sort of this motion.
Something feels constrained, or like
Yeah.
squashed.
It's like it's like I think things are coming up, but then I'm not sure what the things are. In a way that if I was with someone, um, if I was with like if I was with someone else that comes to mind, I would feel more flow, um,
Hmm.
like a hierarchy comes to mind, um, which is interesting.
Hmm. Like some sort of power asymmetry between us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, interesting. So I've had a fascination, obsession, embarrassing, embarrassing interest in intelligence, and I wonder if you explicitly talking about being highly intelligent makes me think that, or like I specifically, not specifically, but like an example of that is you talking about being like a gifted kid in class, um
Huh.
relates to a like, but I'm not a gifted kid in class. Oh, I must listen to him, and my thoughts aren't as something than yours.
Oh man, this is really cool. This is cool. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought this in. This is super juicy. Like now we have like a live thing here that we can like maybe look at, um,
Mm.
if we're lucky. it's possible that looking at it will turn out to be weird and not very workable, but we'll give it a shot and sort of see what happens. Yeah. Um, so my
Yeah,
way of
intimidation.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good compact way to put it. Like intimidated by your abundance of thought, um,
Mm-hmm.
and the stuff making sense. Um, yeah.
Yeah, this is really cool. So, as far as I can tell, when I'm looking at what you're pointing at, I I can map it onto a few things that I can like tell that I'm doing. Um, and I don't totally know what's going on with them. Um, but um, but yeah, I can tell in my system when I introspect. If I could explain what move it is that I'm making, I would. I mean, I guess to put it very briefly, it's something like I'm like asking my body mind, like, what might I be doing that would be participating in like an experience of Kasra being intimidated? So it's not like, am I trying to intimidate him? Like, I'm not quite asking that question, but I'm asking, am I doing anything that is might be part of that somehow?
Mm.
And when I ask that question, I notice that I am. Um, I notice, and it feels connected to the hierarchy thing that you pointed at. Um, there is some feeling of something like dominance or something like um I don't feel totally like surrendered to the conversation itself. Like I feel a bit like I'm sort of steering it. Um
Hmm.
and like I'm needing to steer it, not just that I am, but that and this relates to the thing I was saying about being up on the roof and the sort of the collective just doing its collective thing. I feel a bit like I'm in a mode of like conducting what's happening here a little bit. And I think that part of that is like, okay, we're in a context where there's something that's going to go on my YouTube channel and we are creating it right now. And of course, I would be free to not post it if I didn't feel like it, or you'd be free to tell me, "Hey, I don't want to post this." But the effect of that is that I'm tracking something about some imaginary person hearing this. Um and um I'm pretty used to being recorded and imagining people hearing it and having that not affect me too much. But I think there's some other dimension of what's going on where, like, something like I don't know you that well, or I don't know what to expect from what you'll say. And so there's a bit of like a slight neuroticism on my part that's like trying to steer things to make sure that they'll stay interesting or whatever. Now, all of that is itself intriguing, right? Because it like I don't quite like how the energy of how I did that actually. Like that had its own little powery something to it. I find that intriguing because um I don't understand myself to be particularly promising my YouTube channel to be anything. Um and like, you know, to anybody watching this, if this is boring, you can leave. Like, right? Like nobody's obligated to watch anything here. I am definitely not trying to optimize like denseness of my YouTube channel. I would be doing it differently if I am. I'm optimizing it among other things for uh ease of volume. Like I'm just trying to put up a lot of stuff and not worry too much about even whether it's interesting. Like I want to be interested in whatever I'm saying, but I'm not particularly concerned with coming across as interesting. And I think that that is how I've been orienting. So that makes it intriguing to me that I seem to be slightly more concerned about that here. I'm like, huh, what's going on with that? So, so yeah, and so then there may be a way in which either your response to whatever I'm doing on an embodied level in terms of like power control, etc., or your concept of who I am may also be contributing to the experience of some sort of hierarchical or asymmetrical um, thing. Yeah.
There's something that something was coming up when you were saying I feel the desire to steer this conversation more than I would normally. About yeah, about in a contrast in thought, in a contrast in quantity and quality of thought, um, in levels of age. And then there's like a, but I'm not, I can have a conversation. I can have a conversation a lot more easily um, on my podcast where we show and tell a object because that's a realm that I'm really comfortable in. Um, but then this feels different and more difficult because it's a I have less patterns to match.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how this relates to hmm, uh, can you remind me to check with Rat King Crimson if I can say if he's comfortable with me saying this in a public sense?
Uh, I can do that, but we're now talking maybe more edits to the video.
Ah, right. Hmm. What do I said his name? So I guess it would be difficult to not associate it with him. He talks in a way that's I feel like I'm constantly trying to keep up with it, but uh it's an exciting thing. And there's a wanting to impress him and wanting him to know that I'm keeping up with him.
Mm-hmm.
Um and then a I guess a cleaner feedback loop because I am. And there's a him like if I'm confused, he will explain it in a more concrete way.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Yeah, that feels pretty healthy to me as a description of a dynamic overall. Like it feels like he's inviting you into a pace that you're that's like challenging, but it's a good challenge. And
mhm.
if you do fall behind, it's not like, oh, now you're like getting scraped through the dirt. It's like, no, he slows down and you pick back up to speed. Like, so that feels good. Is my thought. Like, assuming you're enjoying it. Like,
Yeah,
it sounds like you are.
it's a I'm I like running. I've run 2 half marathons. And
Oh wow.
there's a like I'm running with someone that normally runs at a faster pace, and like an excitement and like, oh, I'm trying to keep up, um, which is fun. And initially nervous, because of the it not feeling like a safe space at first. Um, yeah, so something's on the tip of my tongue right now. And why is it on the tip of my tongue and not on my tongue? Um, I, it's like, what would he think about this? What if I'm wrong? Um, so there seems to be more of a wrong narrative with when I'm talking to you than when I'm talking to not uh Red King Crimson in particular, but like with uh with this other person.
Uh-huh.
Um, it seems like he's more agreeable to like, yeah, that's right in some sense, than you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a few things here. One is that I'm often preoccupied by what it is that I'm trying to say. And so sometimes when somebody else says something, I'm sort of like, yeah, yeah, but like, but I'm going to finish my thought or something. And so it's not even like I'm like disagreeing with them. I'm just not really like, I think this is a thing that I do sometimes in conversation. It's just like, I don't really make space for other people's stuff to land. Um, and, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think of myself as generally pretty open-minded and like willing to sort of go, "Oh, what's the good in that idea?" Even if I mostly disagree with it. I'm like, "Ah, but like what would the idea be if it were good though?" Like, or something like that. But I don't know. Does that resonate with your experience of talking to me so far or?
There's a funny thing that's coming up, which is like a meta open-mindedness. Um,
Uh-huh.
I'm open-minded to being open-minded, but I'm not open-minded. Um, which or like I want to be perceived as open-minded, but I'm not open-minded, which I'm not sure why that's I don't know what the it's a tension in my back, but I'm not sure why that is coming to mind. I think a lot of this relates to my there feels like there's this halo effect. That's less in the cognitive bias, like the halo effect that you've heard of. More in a like there's a halo above your head, with people that feel like they are prominent teapot people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's an intimidation that's like I like if someone follows me and only has 100 followers, I feel a lot more comfortable um, saying thoughts that they're going to perceive as wrong,
Mm-hmm.
that they might perceive as wrong. But it's like if he is Malcolm Ocean and he something that's coming up is it, and he's connected to Visa. There's a interesting. Okay, I have to be on my. I have to be performing at my best, and I'm, and then I'm not performing at my best. Once you say a lot of things, I'm like, oh, that makes sense, and then it's like my implicit turn, and I'm like, I don't know, and I come up with like one thing that I'm associating it with. I normally have more associations, but it's they weren't they're not coming up.
Part of the question here is even like what is the nature of the game that we're playing with the conversation that we're having, right? Like is it the game of associating all the stuff? Are we trying to figure out something in particular and we're just like anything that's sort of not helping us figure that thing out is like irrelevant? Although of course sometimes you put in something and you're not sure how it fits and then oh it turns out to be a building block with something else, so maybe it wasn't irrelevant. Um and yeah, I don't know. I'm having a lot of really interesting thoughts as I'm sitting here just taking this whole thing in. Like interesting. I don't know. It feels like a really cool mirror on some dimension of like my experience, like people's experience of me, and like how what it's like to talk to me, and like what I am doing as I'm talking to people. I'm just feeling like very aware. um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's also recorded. Probably on YouTube. Can you? I'll go to bed in like 20 minutes. This was 11:30. Okay.
You're gonna wrap shortly.
Uh, 10 minutes maybe. Um, what are some thoughts that feel are very relevant here?
Hmm.
Or like that feel the most relevant here? Because you're saying you feel a lot of interesting, you're experiencing a lot of interesting thoughts.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've been tracking in my being over the last couple months has been, yeah, something about how I do conversations or something. The thing I thought I was going to say, I'm like, oh, I don't know if that's as relevant as I initially thought, so I'm sort of slightly muddled now. But there's something about like
The camera
just jumped around.
yeah,
Yeah, I sort of saw it out of the corner of my eye as I brought. Oh, did it lose my face? Is that what happened?
nothing's happening now. Oh, the exposure is changing rapidly.
Huh. Weird. Anyway, so yeah, anyway, I guess one thing I could say is I notice myself surrendered now in a way that I wasn't before. And I think there's a few features to that. One of them is simply just that, like, when I was thinking, like, oh, we're going to record a short video, I was attempting to have it be like punchy and like on topic. And now I'm like, well, we are in the unknown together, you and I. I guess that's what's happening. And so there is more of a sense just by virtue of the length of the video and and so on of that. Then there's also just the like, we're actually practicing the thing that we were talking about, which is meta communication about the experience of conversation that we're having, and like, oh, okay, all right, now we're doing that. We're not just talking about meta norms, we're actually like instantiating something here. We're like co-creating some situation of being talking about stuff. um
I'm feeling a lot more flow now.
yeah, yeah, so it feels more flowy. Yeah, and more like we're thinking together, less like uh
It feels like there's more that I can add when this is a conversation about both of our qualities.
right, yeah, because we can be here with it, like, yeah.
It's we're not part. There's not a third participant that you have met more. That being like the idea of social norms.
Right,
Um,
right. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, yeah. Like trying to introduce you to this idea. Like, um, yeah.
but then there, I, I have a sense of like, but I know I do know social norms in a different way than you do, and in a way that could be really interesting. But like, why am I not saying that? Why? Part of it is the length of the time you talk, and I forget the point that I had, like like in the 1/4 section, because you've said a lot of things, um, and I want to, and I'm like, there's something there, and I don't want to skip to the last thing you said, because I remember that there was a nice thing there, earlier that came up, but I don't know what it is now. Um, so which comes with an uncomfort in interrupting you, which relates to a I don't, which relates to a hierarchy thing.
Mm-hmm. It also relates interestingly to another really, really basic axis of culture. So there's ask and guess, which we were sort of, you know, obliquely gesturing at earlier, and then there's high involvement conversation style and high considerateness conversation style. The high considerateness conversation style has a lot more pauses, a lot more, you know, um, handing the floor to somebody else on purpose, asking them a question. High involvement is a lot more expecting people to talk over each other and interrupt.
Like this.
Yeah, just jumping in like that. Yeah, and it's like, and I can keep going, but then if you really want to talk, you'll just say something. Now that's harder to do over Zoom because of latency. Like you actually can't do as tight back and forths, just due to the latency. Um, but yeah, there is also something about um, status and so on that is involved in like who gets to interrupt who or like whatever. Like, um, yeah.
That was an interesting anti-interruption interaction thing. Not anti quite. But I wanted you to talk more, and then I could interrupt you and make a point of doing that. Um, right
Oh, but
there.
then I stopped.
Yeah.
Oh,
I have to go shortly.
yeah.
So I want to say relating to the earlier conversation. What now?
Mm,
In our further interactions, not necessarily this one.
mm, mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this feels juicy and satisfying, and I feel excited to post it. And I feel excited to post it in a totally different way than I felt excited to post something that was, you know, something that I was, I think, mostly conceiving of as like me rambling on a topic, but but like happens to have a interlocutor or whatever.
Mm.
Um, which is how I was sort of conceiving this initially, I guess. That's actually interesting, right? It's like I framed it as a convo, but maybe part of me was actually thinking of it more as like I'm just gonna like share some thoughts, and you'll receive some thoughts, and then the internet will receive some thoughts, which is slightly different. Like that is a slightly different thing. So that itself is kind of neat to notice. Um, yeah, and the whole thing has a neat evolution to it. So I feel like this is actually a really
Yeah.
cool case study that I'm just very excited to put up.
Mm. I feel a tingling in my body. That's an excitement in a a deep a deep well that we can discover together of knowledge and value and wisdom that was covered by anxiety that I have and maybe things that you're doing.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
yeah, I want to go into the well and gain light. Um, and it feels like something that would be helpful would be in our other conversations, pulling back to this conversation and me checking in with like, oh, how do you feel about do you do you feel like you're trying to do you feel like a domination here um and stuff like that.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like having had a conversation like this one to tie it all back creates a context where it's a lot safer to explore stuff because we have some basis for oh it's okay to talk about things that are feeling uncomfortable or weird in our dynamic. Like we've done it. We know that that's workable. So yeah, I expect we will have juicier future conversations, and I'm looking forward to that.
Namaste.
Cool. All right. Have a good night.
Good night.